Good morning and welcome. We begin our service each week by singing an invitation to gather together, even as we are scattered in many different places. Please remain muted as we sing, enter, rejoice, and zoom in. Hello again. I am Sharon Whitehill, and I'm serving as your worship associate this morning at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County, Florida, also known as Uufcc.
No audio.
This service is being broadcast live via Zoom and YouTube. First of all, a big thank you to those supporting our technology this morning: Corey, Tom, Sue, and Sharon G. I'm also most grateful to Jim, Linda, and members of the Uufcc choir for this morning's music. And lastly, welcome to Ted Zawistowski, our speaker today, with thanks in advance for your sermon. Meantime, here are some reminders to help our broadcast run smoothly. We respect and protect everyone's privacy by using only first names and sometimes last initials. We ask that you remain muted throughout the service, even when singing, although we hope you do sing. We invite you to have a chalice or a candle available for our chalice lighting ritual. And we remind you that the Zoom chat feature is disabled during the service. Finally, we hope that you will join us virtually afterwards when we gather for socializing. That will be via Zoom only. But please don't unmute right away, not until you see the posting that invites you to do so. We do need a minute or two to close down the YouTube connection, so we appreciate your patience. And now, this is my official welcome to everyone to our service. As Laura put it a few weeks ago, and so well that I want to quote her word for word. You are welcome here if you believe in the teachings of Jesus or Buddha. You are welcome if you practice paganism. You are welcome if you call your connection to everything God, or the spirit of life, or the mystery of the universe. We believe that all of these approaches are worthy and sacred, and we know that it is good that we gather together. If you're new or would like to learn more about our fellowship, you can email Mary Jane at office@uufcc.org. or visit our website, uufcc.org. We're glad that you're with us this morning. The chalice lighting words to accompany our ritual are from Reverend Scott Taylor. We light this chalice to honor the history that holds and heals us, to honor the stories of heroism that inspire our own, and to honor the faces of loved ones who have died. In their images, we see our own better selves. Our memories do not live in the past. They belong to our futures, and they invite us into building a better life today. So look, listen, Let the memories in. May their light guide our way. As Laura lights the chalice here in the sanctuary, please join me in the recitation of our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. I invite you now to light your chalices or candles at home. Our opening words are from Richard Delgado, an American legal scholar who teaches civil rights and critical race theory at the University of Alabama School of Law. These are his words. 3 years after I got my law degree in the summer of 1989, I was a first-year law teacher invited to attend the first ever workshop on something called critical race theory, to be held at St. Benedict Center in Madison, Wisconsin. At that workshop, I discovered what had been missing for me as a student. People who by then had begun to be recognized across the nation as major intellectual figures. And I discovered a community of scholars who were inventing a language and creating a literature unlike anything I had read for class in 3 years of law school. As we enter the 21st century, critical race theory is no longer new, but it continues to grow and thrive. In our tradition, we revere the living of our lives as a sacred endeavor, believing that the joys and sorrows we experience hallow the living of our days. We have a long tradition here at Uufcc of sharing our joys and sorrows and life milestones by entering them into a book of life. The Book of Life. It's a red book. While we're meeting virtually, you may email your joys and sorrows and personal milestones to bookoflife@uufcc.org. Your messages should be sent no later than the Saturday prior to the service. Then that Sunday, the worship associate will read your message, and it will be entered physically into the red book that we keep at the fellowship. The joys, sorrows, and milestones I've received this week are as follows. I have one, and it's from Lori and Jackie. Please send thoughts, prayers, and intentions for Gabe Diaz, our dear friend, who has been flown by helicopter to Lee Memorial Hospital after falling from a 16-foot ladder. He gained consciousness that evening, that was yesterday evening, but we're still unclear as to the extent of his injuries. Our good thoughts are with you, Lori and Jackie and Gabe. May we hold everyone in love and tenderness. May this fellowship serve as a source of strength and comfort and courage and hope. We'll have a moment of silence now, which will be followed by the hymn, Spirit of Life.
Good morning. My name is Ted Zawistowski. Among other things, I'm the Vice President of the Board here at Uufcc. The title of my paper today is Critical Race Theory and the Projects of 1619 and 1776, an Introduction, meaning this is the beginning of a discussion, not the end of the discussion. Critical race theory is getting a lot of attention in the U.S. today and, no surprise, is being criticized, often by people who know little about it. Well, I don't know a lot about it either, so I won't criticize it much, but we'll just talk about it some. I have found myself wrestling with these materials. I try to be objective and just give them facts, ma'am, or do I explore more subjectively? What do I think about all this, or how do I feel? I find the topic challenging because it means so many different things to so many different people. Before getting into critical race theory, perhaps it is best to first look where it originated. Everything begins with philosophy. In philosophy, critical theory, as distinct from critical race theory, may be traced back to the 1700s in the so-called Age of Reason. For example, philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote 3 books titled Critique of Pure Reason, Critique of Practical Reason, and Critique of Judgment. In that period, there was much talk about learning to think more critically, more carefully, before drawing conclusions. For example, question your assumptions, validate your sources, define your terms, reason carefully. Do not focus your thinking too narrowly, but consider the context of your subject. Test your ideas in the natural world. In other words, think more scientifically, more objectively. For example, do not accept the Bible as a source before analyzing it critically. This approach, called higher criticism, revealed the contradictions, inconsistencies, and historical errors in the Bible through the study of contemporaneous literatures, language studies, history, and archaeological findings. French encyclopedists began assembling and publishing all that was known in a single multi-volume source. Dictionaries were being published to have standard word spellings and definitions. Public libraries began to be created where people could share sources of knowledge. Museums collected and displayed curious, natural, and created items. National constitutions began to be written by thinkers as well-conceived systems of government rather than simply holding to traditional laws and practices inherited from the ancient past. Soon, critical theory was being taught everywhere and applied in many disciplines. Each of these endeavors expanded in range and depth even as chemistry, physics, and biology became established as modern sciences. Land-grant colleges, originally focused on agriculture and mining, were fostered by the U.S. federal government in every state. Universities expanded with many colleges, specialized departments, technical and engineering institutes, schools of medicine and of law, and research laboratories. Many new disciplines emerged, such as the social sciences of anthropology, psychology, sociology, economics, and political science. Critical theory in various ways was applied to all. In time, the best law schools also began teaching critical theory to law students and applying it in the various branches of law, such as commercial, contract, criminal, civil rights, and so on. In 1970, however, Professor Daniel Bell at Harvard pointed out that, despite the active civil rights movement, race was not being considered as a major factor within and throughout our law system. He proposed developing critical race theory. How does race as a concept and in practice appear in and affect how our laws are formed, legislated, interpreted, enforced, and practiced throughout our entire legal system? With critical theory being so established, why does critical race theory provoke such alarm and discussion? Too often, as soon as the word race is mentioned, prejudice raises its ugly head. Soon after, people are demanding that critical race theory should not be taught to children in school. Others say that it is already being taught, and their children are coming home and telling their parents that white people are all racists. More knowledgeable people are saying that critical race theory is not being taught to children in public schools in the USA, but needs to be. It is being discussed in prestigious law schools such as Harvard and some 20 others. The basic tenets of critical race theory include that the concepts of racism and racial outcomes in society are the result of complex, changing, and often subtle social and institutional dynamics rather than just from the explicit prejudices of individuals. For example, how did race-based slavery shape almost every aspect of our American economy, despite our beliefs in free trade and free competition? America's early prosperity thrived on unpaid slave labor. Another key critical race theory concept is intersectionality, which emphasizes that race can interact with other identities, such as gender and social class, to produce complex combinations of power and advantage, or marginalization and disadvantage. Critical race theory scholars view race and white supremacy as social constructs, which serve to uphold the interests of white people at the expense of marginalized communities. Formally colorblind laws can be applied in racially discriminatory ways. For example, defining where polling stations will be located, which days and times for voting are selected, which documents are required for identification, and so on. Does voting on Sunday advantage or disadvantage certain racial, religious, or economic groups? Should citizens be allowed to drop off sealed ballots without leaving their cars? How about mothers with 3 small children? Every 10 years after the census, legislators often design legislative districts to pick their voters, which is called gerrymandering. Social constructionism is a theory that all reality and meaning is created through dynamic interactions with other individuals and groups that are subjective and can change as society changes. Meanings are coordinated with other meanings constructed by society and are not objectively true. That is, independent of the society in which they were formed. An example of social construction is money. Paper money is given value by people agreeing it has value. By itself, it has little meaning. In a pure barter type of economy, where all goods and services are swapped or traded between individuals, paper money has no place. Race is a social construct. So is racism. Within living memory, Virginia law defined a person with 1/32nd black ancestry. That one of one's great-great-great-grandparents is black, that person is black. Blonde, blue-eyed persons may be said to be passing for white if they have African ancestry. Within living memory, we have spoken of the German race, the Jewish race, the Slavic, the Celtic, the Hispanic, and so on. We have ignored that there is more variation within any racial group we may mention than there is between these racial groups. Racism and prejudice are systemic, part and parcel of our entire culture, permeating into every aspect of our society. Piece by piece, our people constructed it over the centuries, beginning with our Constitution. Today, if we look, we can see how some of it works, but often we remain blind to much of it and how we participate in it. It is not just individuals doing their own perverse thing. We are all immersed in it, whether we want to or not, or recognize it or not. For example, many World War II veterans benefited from the GI Bill. They improved their educations and could become homeowners. Few people understood that these benefits were secretly administered by the government in ways that segregated blacks from whites. White veterans benefited much more than black veterans could. White middle-class prosperity grew, while most blacks remained impoverished. Yet most whites credit their own hard work for their own enrichment and others' poverty. Academic critics of critical race theory argue that it relies on social constructivism, elevates storytelling over evidence and reason, rejects truth and merit, and opposes liberalism. Since 2020, conservative lawmakers in many states have been trying to ban or restrict critical race theory instruction, as well as other racism programs. Critical race theory supporters reply that such lawmakers have poorly defined or misrepresented the concepts and importance of critical race theory, and that the goal of those lawmakers is to silence discussion of racism, inequality, social injustice, inequity, and the history of race. Now, today, two major actions are trying to address the issues of racism and prejudice: the 1619 Project and the 1776 Project. In 2019, the New York Times initiated the 1619 Project with a special magazine in which evidence was gathered to support the idea of the pervasive effect of race and slavery on every aspect of American culture. It was published on the 400th anniversary of the first accidental landing of African slaves in the colony of Virginia. They might have been set free, but they were kept as slaves by the colonialists. This slavery is represented as the starting point from which American society developed. The magazine includes some 100 pages of historical articles, poems, anecdotes, illustrations, and photographs. Since then, additional materials have been coming or are being prepared, including podcasts, a movie, curriculum materials suitable for schools, a book, and so forth. These materials include some 17 literary works of poetry and fiction to help us learn to sense what we are immersed in, to become emotionally aware, not just intellectually. This major undertaking has been praised, but also criticized for including materials for which historical support is lacking. For example, that universal health care in the U.S. has been blocked, quote, because blacks would receive the same benefits as whites, end quote. The authors use expressions such as, quote, anti-black racism flows in the very DNA of this country, end quote. Use of biological terms is itself a racist way of thinking that racism is inherent in our very bodies. In response, the then President Donald Trump, in November of 2020, called into existence a 1776 commission to create school materials with a more patriotic emphasis. The goal is not only to inform our children, but to get them to feel pride in their heritage. Hillsdale College, a conservative institution, developed a curriculum for classes K through 12 on some 2,450 pages, published this past January. Support materials are already published or are forthcoming. Critics point out that these materials cast a positive light on American exceptionalism, and while not ignoring racial issues in the U.S., tend to minimize its significance, as in contrast to the 1619 materials, thus providing an incomplete, distorted image of American society. President Joe Biden canceled the commission on Inauguration Day. The proponents of these two ideologies, therefore, are simultaneously striving competitively to not only provide students with facts objectively, to teach critical analysis, but also to guide their emotions in a chosen, predetermined direction. One side seeks to awaken not only consciousness, but also conscience. That is, to not only learn how we got to be where we are today, but also to be moved to do the work necessary to make our country become better. The other side seeks to foster appreciation for all that is positive in our culture and to proudly continue to move it forward. However, perhaps letting the faults and failures of the past appear to be left behind. Yet, nevertheless, race and racial prejudice remain very alive in our society. They have not been left behind in the past. They cannot be minimized and ignored. If anything, they are more out in the open today. Hillsdale representatives mentioned the 1619 project negatively. They present their own materials in a very positive and appealing manner. But Hillsdale College also publishes very conservative right-wing materials of a political nature, which raises questions about the possible slant of their K through 12 curriculum. Portions of these materials are already available online, and more is coming. I recommend to teachers and parents, and perhaps grandparents, to look at both. If we raise our children to believe they are living in a disgusting society that cannot escape from its ingrained hate, prejudice, and injustice, can we expect them to become inspired to strive to uplift our country into a purer condition? If we raise them to wear blinders and only see our nation's positive successes and not its serious failings, will they become moved to confront those failings and work to eliminate or at least reduce them? And closer to home, what can we as individuals and a congregation do to educate ourselves and our community to inspire positive action? How have race and racism affected us right here? What can we do to address these issues more effectively? In what ways have we failed or succeeded? Perhaps the discussions stemming from the projects of 1619 and 1776 will help us find the better way. Perhaps we can discuss these issues in the social hour following this service. Thank you.
For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For
own work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks for all that is our life.
For sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours at last, we come with praise and thanks for all that is our life. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are all to use, to build the common good. And may our always glad.
Ted, I want to say thank you for that wonderful talk. You covered a huge territory there very succinctly, and I especially loved the historical review of critical thinking. It brought me back to graduate school, but in much simpler and more accessible terms. Thank you again. I'm sure you all know that congregations exist because of the generous support of their members and friends. It's both our privilege and our responsibility to contribute to the health and future of Uufcc. Your offering, whether by pledge or donation, can be in the form of checks mailed to the office or dropped in our mailbox. Or you may call the office to make other arrangements. And we're also equipped to accept donations through the Venmo app. If that's your choice, that should be made out to Uufcc offering. Today is also the second Sunday of the month, so we will have our second helping. We'd like to remind you of that and hope you will contribute to that. We continue to give to the Harry Chapin Food Bank, Meals on Wheels, and Chats. Hunger never stops happening. Your generosity is always appreciated, but if you're with us for the first time today, please do not feel obligated to give, because this morning you are our guest. Now it's time for our Life of the Community section, where we highlight Uufcc's special events and activities. If you'd like to highlight fellowship events yourself during the service, have them highlighted, email the worship associates at bookoflife@uufcc.org. Today I have the following announcements. The UU Common Read builds community in our congregations and our movement. This coming Thursday, November 18th, we meet to discuss the book Breathe, A Letter to My Sons by Imani Perry. Join us from 1 to 2:30, either in person or on Zoom, on our universal Zoom link, which you will find in any copy of our weekly updates newsletter. Those updates are well worth the short time it takes to read and stay connected. That's always the case, but especially so during this pandemic. For example, the Saturday morning Labyrinth Walk at 9 a.m. at the Fellowship. In person, obviously, for a walk, is a chance to talk informally with various members of the board. And on Sunday, November 28th, we launch our second soft reopening. Yay! In-person services here at the fellowship. Continuing, of course, our safety precautions. We'll continue live streaming YouTube then also, but we'll only use Zoom at that point for online chat after the service. Again, check your weekly updates for all the details. These details and more. Our closing words are from a veteran middle school teacher in Oregon by the name of Catherine Watkins. Watkins herself is of mixed ancestry, African American, Cherokee, Apache, Choctaw, Comanche, and Irish. And she's affiliated with a program founded by the Southern Poverty Law Center. The program for educators is called Learning for Justice. These words from Catherine Watkins then are nothing if not blunt. I'm going to say something that's not nice and not sweet, but it's true. If you're not evolving into an anti-racist educator, you're making yourself obsolete. Our district is only getting browner and browner. So even if you're resistant, you are eventually going to have to come to the light. We fire teachers who sexually abuse our children, and soon we'll be firing those who do and say racist things. Our district might not be there yet, but the Oregon Education Association is working on it, and the National Education Association is working on it, and it's just a matter of time. You either evolve or dissolve. Now please join me in our traditional recitation as Laura comes forward and extinguishes the chalice. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of hope, the fire of commitment, or the warmth of community. May those ideals shine in our lives and warm our hearts until we are together again. Go now in peace. Following the music, Go Now in Peace, those who would like are invited to stay for our social time, to which Ted has made the very tempting invitation to speak about and respond to his talk this morning. We will let you know as soon as the technology is ready for your conversation.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit of us surround you everywhere, everywhere.